This was about 10 years ago. I was around 12 or 13 at the time. I grew up in a small town in southern Ontario, Canada, where there really wasn't anything to do during the summer holidays. To defeat the summer boredom, my father and I would take 2 weeks every summer and rent a cabin up north. Our favorite place to go was a small tourist island called Manitoulin Island, which was a 6-hour drive north from our hometown, and then a 2-hour ferry ride across the lake to the island. While on the ferry, an older gentleman in a semi-formal suit and pant was handing out a small stack of papers in the tourist section of the boat. My father and I approached him and took one of his flyers. It was a map of the island, crudely designed in MS Paint or an equivalent free drawing program. On the map was various tourist attractions and picnic areas. We thanked the man, excited to travel the entirety of the island, which was the original plan, and went on our way. Upon returning to the tourist room a half-hour later, the man was no longer there. We had just assumed he had run out of amateur maps. When we finally got to the island, we were exhausted. It took an additional hour and a half to get to our cabin, which was located about 15 feet from the shore of a beautiful rock-bottom lake. We spent the majority of the 2 weeks traveling from one end of the island to the other, hitting every tourist attraction and small tackle shop we ran into. On the final 3 days of our trip, we had run out of places to go, and then my father remembered the map. At the very bottom right corner of the map, which was also the lowest, most accessible tip of the island, was a long dotted line that indicated an extensive dirt road. At the end of the road was a picnic area. We thought, why not? It's right by the lake. It might be very beautiful. We packed our bags and loaded them into an old 1988 Ford Mustang ragtop. This car had been pushed to its absolute limits this trip, and was having more difficulty starting with each passing day. The oil had run significantly thin due to the extreme summer heat, and a couple times during the trip, but the car was still moving, and my father, being a mechanic himself, thought nothing of it. The oil pressures always resumed their normal viscosity after the car had rested for a few hours. We got our old school paper map out and plotted our route. The drive was beautiful. Open fields and mighty emerald forests. That was, until we started to reach civilization, if you could call it that. The houses that came into view were quite disheveled in each town we passed through, and while in one of the native towns, we witnessed an entire town of Native Americans, covered in red and black war paint. They stared at us as we drove past, but again we thought nothing of it. Probably just a ceremony or celebration that we had unknowingly disrupted. Hell, I'd be angry too. Finally, we made the final turn that would take us down this elusive dirt road, the last one we had yet to discover. At this point, we had been driving for about 2 hours, and the heat had made the car's oil pressure gradually drop. But we were too close to our destination to turn back now. As we drove down this road, we noticed the rundown and mostly boarded up houses become more and more scarce. The distance between them grew larger until finally there were no more houses to be seen. The road slowly turned from asphalt to cracked gray stone to loose gravel to dirt. The road became so narrow only a single car could fit on it at a time, and we hoped no one on a four-wheeler would come around the bend like a bat out of hell, not expecting visitors. I would also like to mention the telephone poles stopped at the gravel road. Whatever was back here had no electricity supplied to them by the town. The further we went, the more uneasy we became. We saw old abandoned logging equipment in behind broken and mangled trees. The sun became blotted out by the thick foliage overhead. We continued to drive, making jokes about the hills have eyes and wrong turn, and other horrible situations of the sort. Finally, we reached a clearing. Beside the now driveway that was once the road we were on, we saw what could only be described as a massive burning stake that looked like something they used to burn witches in Salem. This thing was massive, at least 15 feet high, and with a 10-foot platform halfway up. It was built out of twine, logs, twigs, and straw. In the middle of the platform was a massive log that stood up from the middle and stood probably another 8 feet high. Seriously, look up burning at the stake, and that is what this thing looked like. A little further down the driveway was an old 2-story house. It reminded me of a plantation mansion, not because of the size, but design. Almost all of the windows were shattered, and an old door hung off a single hinge at the entrance. A mere 10 feet from the house was a cliff that dropped off straight into the rocky lake below. My father and I thought we had missed a turn, but there was absolutely no way to go but straight. My stomach dropped when I looked just past the creepy old house. Beside a white van that looked like it had rolled through a ditch was a picnic table. A single wooden picnic table, right beside these people's house. My father and I exchanged nervous glances when all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dust cloud. There was a beat-up red pickup truck racing toward our parked car. He had come from behind the house, and he had his foot to the floor. My father panicked. He threw the Mustang in reverse and spun around so fast I almost vomited. He shifted into drive and tore away, but something made his eyes widen. The car was beeping at him. The oil pressure was dangerously low. He swore as he gunned it. The car made a small cry of anguish before ripping up the dirt and bits of gravel as we tore out of there like our lives depended on it. Who knows? Maybe it did. We soared down that dirt road, taking risky turns, catching air when we hit huge holes in the earth. All the while the car screaming at him, begging him to stop. But he didn't. He never slowed down. He never looked back. We finally arrived to the paved part of the road, and my father looked behind us. No one was following us. He slowed down slightly, but I knew he was still well over the speed limit. Once we cleared the areas that advertised their shitty housing, we pulled into the first garage we saw. The car nearly stalled right then and there. The last 2 days we just stayed in our cabin, trying to recount what had happened, and also unable to really do anything because the car repair had used up the rest of our spending money. The day we left the island was the last time we spoke about the incident. We did, however, look for the man giving out the maps on the ferry ride home. He wasn't there. We asked a couple of the locals that were going to the mainland for shopping, and no one ever heard about this so-called picnic area that we had visited. In fact, when we showed them the map we were given, no one could recognize the area past the small towns that were before it, but warned us that the inhabitants of those towns weren't always the kindest to strangers. I don't know if horror movies have tainted my brain, but if they have taught me anything, I think that picnic area is a trap to get curious people to drive down there so they can be killed and barbecued on their shrine, or maybe just robbed. Who knows? So for any of you planning on visiting the island, I hope I don't deter you. It is a beautiful and peaceful place, and the locals are friendly and kind and trustworthy. But if you ever see a kind older gentleman in a semi-formal suit and pant, take his map and smile sweetly. Some of the locations are truly majestic, but never, and I mean never, go to the picnic area at the bottom point of the island. And crazy, maybe psychotic guy that chased my father and I down an old logging road, let's never meet.